Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Mr. Casey, Piro Murshid, Dr. Ehtisham, ladies and gentlemen of Tamarind Society. Uh, I've had the pleasure of attending several events before, and I loved them all. Some of them were culturally very rich. There were others which were very highly entertaining, and the rest were intellectually gratifying. I enjoyed them all. But unlike the previous occasions when I spoke in my native Urdu, today the lingua franca is English for obvious reason, and I have to speak in my English I'm very uncomfortable with. My English at best leaves much to be desired. It's a work in progress because I started learning English when I was 16. I came from the madrasa. So, that having been said, please bear with me because when I speak in my English, I may not be as lucid as you would like me to be. Anyway, the purpose of today's event was to listen to Mr. Casey describe his observations and experiences in Pakistan and to listen to Dr. Ehtisham's scholarly narration of what had happened, what caused Pakistan to come into being. I would restrict myself to telling you the reasons why Pakistan was achieved. Ladies and gentlemen, the opinions are divided on why Pakistan was achieved. The opinion held by most young Pakistanis who had their schooling in last 25-30 years is basically shaped, or I would say synthesized, by reading the government-enforced textbooks, particularly of a subject called Pakistan Studies, which was purposefully designed under instructions of the favorite ruler, the extremist Islamist military dictator Ziaul Haq. He was himself a very ardent follower and a zealous proponent of obscurantist Islam, same as the Saudis, the Taliban, and the Al-Qaeda. The creed followed by these militants and suicide bombers and the Taliban is called Wahhabism and or Salafism. They all belong to the Deobandi school of thought of Islam's theology. They consider Muslims of all other sects, be they Dawoodi Bohri Shia or the Ismaili Imami Shia or the Isna Ashri Shia, for that matter the entire overwhelming majority of liberal Sunni Muslims, to be renegades of Islam, murtad. They are considered infidels who must be executed. Not should be, must be executed. That is one opinion. The second opinion is held by those people who went through hand-picked news items, articles, and some editorials of pre-partition Indian newspapers. And I think the third and the only opinion left is what is based on actual events leading up to partition. That was documented by independent, non-partisan, objective historians. And those events have been recorded, and one can find them through the recorded minutes of the Pakistan Muslim League, the resolutions passed and approved by the founding fathers under the leadership of Jinnah, Jinnah's discussions with Gandhi, Jinnah's discussions with the Viceroy Lord Mountbatten, and his speeches, particularly the one he made to the first Legislative Assembly of Pakistan, and his various press conferences. Now, These events have that you find from this data. Uh, I will narrate some of them, and you will be able to deduce your own uh, conclusions whether Pakistan was made for one particular reason or the other. The story goes back to 1600. On the last day of 16th century, uh, British government gave a charter to East India Company to do trade with South Asia. And it took them nearly 2 centuries to come to India and capture and rule region by region of India until they held sway over the entire subcontinent. Like Dr. H. Sham mentioned, Indian nationals mutinied against them. And when I say Indian nationals, it means the great majority of Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and the smaller minorities. They fought shoulder to shoulder against the British as one nation. But they failed. You narrated some of the reasons. There are plenty more reasons. I'm sure for brevity you had to. But they failed. And the following year, in 1858, British government passed the India Act second time, through which India was officially made a colony of the British Crown. The first major policy decision of the Raj was to make sure that the unity and the harmony shown by various ethnicities of India, which made them one unified force, had to be demolished through a very long process. The process included overt and covert measures, whisper campaigns, rumor mills. They made sure that there were vicious publications inciting ethnic discord. They wanted to make sure that a hatred was created. The Indians were divided so that they could never come up as a unified force to throw the British out. The mantra of divide and rule. Now, people do not realize, I think, it's a layman's view, I'm telling you my view, that what Britain had done was to make sure that they create undying hatred so that they can never be together. Until the time of official colonization, Indians lived together as one nation. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, or other small minorities. Although the overall Indian culture had some subcultures like North Indian culture, South Indian culture, Muslim culture, and Hindu culture, but there were a lot of commonalities which bound them together and made them as one Indian culture. And that was the enemy. It had to be destroyed. British made sure that it was destroyed. What I'm trying to say is that the seeds of partition were sown within few decades after official colonization in 1858. It came to be harvested in 1947, whether Gandhi fought against partitioning or Maulana Azad fought against partitioning or Jinnah also initially went along with it for not partitioning. It had to happen. The discord was too deep, the hatred was too much, the trust deficit between the ethnicities was lasting. It had to happen. I don't read that in history books. That is an impression that you get after you go through the whole process and find out why people were doing this. I have not read it anywhere. It's my own opinion that partition had to happen. It had been made a fait accompli, no matter what anybody else says. But the relationship that Hindus and Muslims had, the harmony, the unity, like good neighbors, they visited each other on social occasions, on cultural occasions. They participated in each other's religious festivals. For instance, in India, Eid used to be a national holiday. Holi was a national holiday. Shab Barat and Diwali were national holidays. There was no difference. It was one nation. And the Britishers made sure that they had to demolish and make them several nations. It obviously had to happen when Britishers were supposed to go back. Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs living together was mission impossible already because of what they had put in. It was a minefield. There was no way they would have continued as one nation anymore. What like Dr. Ehtisham said, in 1885, the Congress Party was formed by that British civil servant, like you said. Allen Octavian Hume was his name. And Hindus being the overwhelming majority, they dominated the platform of Congress. And British, while they were trying to create the rifts and discontents, they adopted various means, and they all bore fruit later. They provoked Hindus to demand ban on cow slaughter. That used to be the cheapest source of meat for Muslims. They encouraged Muslims to protest violently against the Hindu-inspired national anthem Bande Mataram because they said it hurt Muslim sensibilities. They also provoked Hindus to demand that the script for the future national language be changed from Persian to Devanagari, virtually making Hindi rather than Urdu the best candidate for national language. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the divisions were made too deep. The differences were going to be irreconcilable. The process went on after Congress was founded and Muslims realized that it was a numbers game. They had virtually no say in matters of national interest on national issues. And part of the process of disuniting them was that there were paid agents provocateurs, I would say, among the Muslim clergy who would give sermons on the Friday khutbah that Muslims should not learn the English language, should not adopt the English attire, or should not follow the English etiquette because that would rob them of their heritage, their legacy, their culture, their custom, their religious sanctity. So most Muslim families started sending their children to madrasa, if at all. But Hindus, they were progressive. They kept sending their children to government schools. They got diplomas, degrees. They had jobs. And within a matter of 3-4 decades after the colonization, the official colonizations, Muslims had a very high rate of illiteracy. They were unemployed. They were afflicted with abject poverty, lived in squalid conditions. They went down to the bottom tier of Indian social pyramid in the same category as the untouchables and the aborigines. There was no future for them anymore. What Sir Syed came and tried to revive them and tell them to go get education because that is where the future is, a long story. During that time, at the turn of the century, we had a very small, insignificantly small Sunni minority of the creed called Wahhabi. There were not very many. And one Wahhabi journalist called Maulana Maududi, he was a high school dropout and a self-taught Wahhabi scholar. He was very vocal about creation of Pakistan. He didn't accept partition. He was against it. But Pakistan had to happen because of the partition. So a year later, the leader Jinnah died, and Maududi had a clean sweep. He migrated from India to Pakistan. And only in a matter of few months, the famous slogan of Pakistan ka matlab kya la ilaha illallah was coined. People who were deadly opposed to Pakistan were now behind this slogan, and they wanted to Islamize Pakistan. Now, Jinnah has been blamed by many people that he did not make sure that it was going to be a secular country. One message here, one speech there doesn't cut the deal. But point was that Jinnah was a very able constitutional lawyer. Most of you are doctors here. When you prescribe a medicine, you expect your patient to take that medicine. Jinnah would have never thought that Pakistan would be a democracy and Islamic democracy. As a lawyer, he knew a democracy means it has to be secular, because the sovereignty lies with the people in a democracy, but it lies with Allah in an Islamic ideological state. So Jinnah had no clue that as soon as he is gone, people will think of a democracy in an experimental way. There is no religious rule in a democracy. It just cannot be. The sovereignty has to be with the people. And it's a numbers game. Majority would decide something, it would happen. But for having an ideological Islamic democracy, it's a new animal. It has never happened anywhere before. So Maududi was in Pakistan. He whipped up the favor for Islamization. It was his experiment. Ziaul Haq became instrumental because of the war in Afghanistan. The Soviet Union had to be ousted from them. The jihadis were cultured. What could have happened? But despite all that regression, social decline, and misery, Muslims had one thing going in India. They had the freedom to practice their religion, their religious rituals and celebrations. Neither the Hindus obstructed it, nor the British rulers obstructed it. So in pre-partition India, there was no danger to Islam as such from non-Muslims. Suddenly, how it has become a subject to danger in Pakistan. So Islam was not in danger. Pakistan was not made for Islam. It was made for Muslims of India in the Muslim majority provinces. So changing the whole history has been retooled after Maududi came over. The struggle for independent state for Muslims in the Muslim majority provinces was renamed after the fact as a struggle for an Islamic country. Now, going back to India, even today, they have the freedom, all sects of Muslims have the freedom to practice their religion according to their belief, and there are no obstructions. Sadly, that cannot be said about Pakistan. Pakistan is meant only for Wahhabis now, and Wahhabism was spread and it became so common in Pakistan to have young men sporting a beard saying Alhamdulillah, MashaAllah. Ziaul Haq had a role to play in that too. The annual confidential report of all government functionaries is prepared by the supervising officer. Ziaul Haq added a column to annual confidential report saying that the person that is being reported about, how much information he has about Islam, how compliant he is with Islam, and depending on his being a very good Muslim, he would get the next grade, he would get the raise, he would get the promotions. So the immediate effect of that was that in every office in Pakistan, there was Inshallah, MashaAllah, and there was a Musalla in every officer's room. There was so much of fake irreligiosity that it became a political thing to look like a very compliant Muslim. The jihad in Afghanistan promoted it. The whole atmosphere was charged with petrodollars because Saudi Arabia promoted it. And whether there is a future that we will ever go back to the secular state that Jinnah had envisaged, in my opinion, there is no hope. There is no going back. The Bengalis did it. Good luck to them. But in Pakistan, the atmosphere is not right. Nobody dare suggest that we should go back to our secular state. So I'm afraid I cannot give you any hope. That's all I have to say. Thank you.